Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly mundane yet oddly captivating world of beavers, those industrious rodents who spend their days doing the same repetitive tasks over and over again. While nature documentaries make them seem like engineering marvels, the reality is that beaver life is basically just chewing wood, slapping water, and building dams in an endless cycle of aquatic monotony. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up one morning and discover that overnight, your body has apparently been redesigned by someone who's never actually seen a beaver before. Your tail, which used to be merely embarrassingly large, has now achieved what can only be described as architectural significance. It's like someone strapped a leather coffee table to your lower back and called it evolution. You try to turn around in your lodge and immediately knock over 3 weeks' worth of carefully arranged sticks. Your mother gives you the look, you know the one, the same expression she'd give a dam that started leaking in 5 different places. Your teeth have also joined this biological coup against your dignity. They've grown to a size that makes eating a delicate operation and talking a minor engineering challenge. Every morning you catch your reflection in the still water and wonder if this is what puberty looks like for everyone, or if you've drawn the short stick in nature's lottery. The other young beavers paddle by looking sleek and coordinated, while you've become a furry collection of oversized parts held together by stubborn determination and increasingly frequent snacks. And then there's your voice. What used to be a respectable warning slap has transformed into something that sounds like a wet bath towel being thrown against a bathroom wall. You practice in private, attempting the authoritative crack that adult beavers achieve, but all you manage is a sad plop that wouldn't intimidate a particularly lazy fish. The indignity of adolescence, you realize, extends even to your percussion section. The existential weight of your future settles around your shoulders like a soggy blanket. You're going to spend the rest of your life every single day from now until you're too old to hold a stick building, essentially the same thing, over and over again. Dam, maintain dam, rebuild dam, improve dam. Explain dam to younger beavers, who will inevitably improve upon your techniques and make you feel ancient. It's not that you don't like building things, it's just that you hadn't quite grasped the repetitive nature of your calling. You float in the pond one evening, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and doubt, and wonder if this is what midlife crisis feels like, except you're experiencing it at the biological equivalent of 16. Other species get to migrate, or hibernate, or at least change scenery occasionally. You get to move sticks from one side of the water to the other, and if you're feeling particularly adventurous, maybe try a new mud consistency. Your mother finds you having these philosophical moments and suggests, with the patience of someone who's clearly had this conversation before, that perhaps you'd feel better if you found something constructive to do with your paws, like practice your stick-carrying technique, or work on your posture, or anything, really, that involves less floating around looking contemplative and more contributing to the family's engineering projects. The other young beavers in your area seem to operate from some kind of secret manual that nobody bothered to give you. They glide through social interactions with the confidence of creatures who actually understand the unwritten rules of beaver society. You, meanwhile, approach every conversation like you're trying to solve a puzzle while wearing mittens and being timed. There's Jeremy, whose dam building skills are apparently legendary among the local aquatic rodent community, despite the fact that he's only 3 months older than you. He carries sticks with a casual efficiency that makes your own efforts look like interpretive dance performed by someone who's never heard music. When he explains water flow dynamics, other young beavers nod along as if he's revealing the secrets of the universe, while you're still trying to figure out why water insists on moving downhill in the first place. Then there's the whole business of romantic prospects. You've been practicing what you think are impressive swimming techniques, perfecting your stick selection process, and generally trying to present yourself as the kind of beaver who has his life figured out. The results have been mixed. Actually, that's generous. The results have been a series of encounters where potential mates paddle away before you can even demonstrate your signature move of carrying a branch that's almost too big for you but not quite. There was that one beaver, Sarah, who seemed genuinely interested in your dam theories, until you got overly excited and started explaining your innovative approach to mud distribution. You could see the exact moment her eyes glazed over, followed immediately by her remembering an urgent appointment elsewhere in the pond. You've since learned that let me tell you about my mud techniques is not, apparently, considered romantic small talk. The adults in your community have developed a particular way of looking at your generation, a mixture of resigned patience and barely concealed despair. When they correct your technique, which happens approximately every 15 minutes, they do so with the weary air of teachers who've given up hope of actual improvement and are now just trying to prevent immediate catastrophe. Your Uncle Ralph, who's been building dams since before you were a gleam in your father's eye, has started prefacing his advice with phrases like, "Well, I suppose that's one way to do it," and "The important thing is that you're trying." Learning that finding yourself as a young beaver apparently involves an enormous amount of chewing comes as something of a surprise. You'd expected some kind of spiritual journey, maybe some soul-searching swims through various watersheds, perhaps a meaningful encounter with a wise old otter who'd share the secrets of aquatic enlightenment. Instead, you discover that beaver self-actualization mostly consists of gnawing your way through increasingly challenging types of wood until you develop the calluses and jaw strength necessary for adult-level construction projects. Your teeth become both your tools and your meditation practice. Chew, chew, chew through the morning. Chew, chew, chew through the afternoon. By evening, your jaw aches with the satisfying soreness of muscles being put to proper use, and you've managed to reduce a perfectly good aspen branch to transportable segments. It's not glamorous work, but there's something oddly centering about the rhythm of it, the way your body settles into the familiar motion and your mind is free to wander. Your first official stick placement happens on a Tuesday that starts like any other day and quickly becomes a masterclass in the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. You approach the partially constructed dam with the confidence of someone who's spent countless hours observing the process and absolutely none actually doing it. How hard can it be, really? Stick goes in water, water slows down, engineering happens. The stick you've selected is a respectable piece of willow, roughly the length of your body, and possessing what you consider to be excellent structural potential. You wade into the current, feeling the familiar tug of moving water against your legs, and identify what appears to be the perfect placement location. The water is just the right depth, the existing framework seems stable, and your internal beaver compass is pointing confidently towards success. You position the stick, adjust the angle slightly, and release it with the satisfied air of someone completing a job well done. The stick immediately spins 90 degrees, catches the current, and departs downstream with what you could swear is a mocking little wave. You stand in the water, paws empty, watching your carefully selected branch join the ranks of failed engineering attempts floating towards someone else's territory. 3 more sticks meet similar fates before you begin to suspect that there might be more to this process than simply placing wood in water and hoping for structural integrity. The existing dam framework, which had looked so stable from the shore, turns out to be a complex network of precisely balanced forces that your stick additions have been disrupting rather than enhancing. It's like trying to add a room to a house by throwing lumber at it and expecting the architecture to sort itself out. Your father appears beside you with the silent materialism that all parent beavers seem to master, watching your efforts with an expression of carefully controlled patience. "The current's running stronger here than it looks," he offers, which you recognize as beaver speak for, "You're doing this completely wrong, but I'm going to let you figure that out for yourself." He demonstrates the proper technique, which involves a complex series of measurements, angles, and what appears to be intuitive understanding of hydraulic engineering principles that nobody mentioned during your informal education. Understanding that trees don't actually want to be cut down comes as something of a philosophical shock. You'd always assumed that trees were simply standing around, waiting for helpful beavers to come along and turn them into useful construction materials. The first time you sink your teeth into the bark of a mature aspen, you discover that trees have opinions about this process, and those opinions are largely negative. The tree fights back. Not in any dramatic way, it doesn't uproot itself and storm off in a huff, but it resists your efforts with passive-aggressive stubbornness. The bark is tougher than you expected. The wood grain runs in directions that seem designed to confuse your teeth, and every few minutes the tree drops small branches on your head, as if to remind you that this is a hostile takeover, not a cooperative venture. There's a satisfying thunk when your teeth finally bite deep enough to get proper purchase on the wood. It's a sound that resonates through your skull and makes you feel connected to generations of beavers who've performed this same task. For about 3 seconds, you feel like a competent member of your species, a skilled craftsman carrying on an ancient tradition of aquatic engineering. Then you realize you've bitten off considerably more than you can chew, both figuratively and quite literally. The chunk of wood between your teeth is roughly the size of your head, and has apparently decided to remain permanently attached to the rest of the tree. You can't bite down further without dislocating your jaw, can't back up without losing face, and can't ask for help without admitting that you've overestimated both your abilities and the cooperative nature of your chosen tree. Mud, you discover, is the universal solution to engineering problems you don't understand. Can't get the stick to stay in place? Add mud. Water flowing in directions that defy your careful planning? More mud. Gaps in your construction that seem structurally significant? Mud will sort it out. It's like duct tape for aquatic construction projects, not particularly elegant, but surprisingly effective when applied with sufficient optimism and generous quantities. Water flow dynamics, as explained by increasingly frustrated family members, turns out to be significantly more complicated than water goes downhill unless you put stuff in its way. Your Uncle Dave, who has the patience of a saint and the technical vocabulary of an engineering textbook, attempts to explain the principles of hydraulic pressure, flow rates, and structural load distribution using examples that involve sticks, rocks, and increasingly elaborate gestures with his paws. See, the water wants to follow the path of least resistance, he explains, positioning demonstration sticks in a way that's supposed to illustrate laminar flow patterns. So if you place your materials here, he moves a stick slightly to the left, the current will redirect here. Another stick adjustment, which creates a pressure differential that. You nod along enthusiastically while secretly wondering if there's supposed to be some kind of genetic beaver knowledge that makes this obvious, because right now it looks like he's playing a very serious game of aquatic pickup sticks. The art of carrying sticks that are definitely too big for you becomes a source of both pride and frequent embarrassment. There's something deeply satisfying about selecting a piece of wood that pushes the boundaries of your carrying capacity. It makes you feel strong, capable, and impressively ambitious. The problem arises when you actually have to transport your oversized cargo from the cutting site to the construction zone without drowning, getting stuck between trees, or dropping it on your own tail. You develop a technique that you privately call aggressive optimism, which involves gripping your chosen branch with a confidence that far exceeds your actual ability to control it. The results are mixed. Sometimes you successfully navigate the transport process and arrive at your destination feeling like a beaver capable of great things. More often, you find yourself tangled in underwater vegetation, struggling to free both yourself and your cargo, while maintaining the pretense that this was all part of your plan. Learning that measuring twice, cut once, doesn't really apply when your measuring tools consist of stubby arms and wishful thinking comes as both a relief and a source of ongoing frustration. Your forearms reach exactly as far as your forearms reach, which provides a consistent if limited unit of measurement. Distances greater than 2 arm lengths plus a stretch fall into the category of probably about right, or we'll make it work somehow. This leads to a construction philosophy based heavily on adaptation and creative problem solving. When your carefully planned stick turns out to be 3 inches too long for its intended space, you don't recut it, you redesign the space to accommodate your stick. When a gap turns out to be smaller than your measurements suggested, you celebrate having extra material rather than admit to measurement errors. It's a flexible approach to engineering that emphasizes resilience over precision. The discovery that some trees are secretly harder than others arrives along with your first chipped tooth and a newfound respect for the deceptive nature of bark. From the outside, most trees look like trees brown, vertical, presumably made of chewable wood. The reality turns out to be more complex. Some trees are soft and cooperative, practically falling apart at the first touch of your teeth. Others are basically wooden rocks disguised as vegetation, waiting to punish overconfident young beavers who approach them with insufficient respect. You learn to test new trees carefully, starting with gentle exploratory gnaws before committing to full-scale cutting operations. The hard way teaches you to read bark texture, wood density, and what your experienced elders call the attitude of the tree. Some aspens want to be dams. Others aspens have different plans and will make their opinions known through your dental work. The conversation where your parents suggest you explore other opportunities happens on a morning that starts with what you think is going to be a routine family planning meeting and quickly becomes a diplomatic way of saying, "It's time for you to find your own pond, dear." Your mother approaches the topic with the delicacy of someone diffusing a small explosive device, while your father maintains the expression of a beaver who has been practicing this speech in front of the lodge mirror. "You've developed such wonderful skills," your mother begins, which you immediately recognize as the opening move in a conversation you're not going to enjoy, and we've been thinking that maybe it's time for you to apply those skills somewhere that could really benefit from fresh ideas and innovative approaches. Your father nods supportively while examining the lodge ceiling with sudden fascination. The subtext translates roughly to, "You're taking up space, your construction techniques are questionable at best, and we'd like to start enjoying our retirement without constantly worrying about whether you're going to accidentally dam the wrong part of the creek." They deliver this message with such gentle encouragement that you almost feel grateful for being evicted from your childhood home. Packing your belongings turns out to be a remarkably quick process, primarily because you don't have belongings. Your entire life's accumulation of personal possessions consists of a few favorite sticks that you've been gnawing on, a collection of interesting rocks that seemed important at the time, and a vague understanding of basic dam building principles. Everything fits in a small pile that you can transport in a single swimming trip, which is either wonderfully minimalist or deeply depressing, depending on your perspective. Your parents help you organize your departure with the efficiency of creatures who have clearly been planning this transition for some time. Your mother packs you extra food for the journey, even though beaver territories are typically separated by distances that can be measured in pleasant afternoon swims rather than epic migrations. Your father offers technical advice about site selection, water flow assessment, and the importance of establishing good relationships with neighboring beaver families, none of which you write down because you're confident you'll remember everything perfectly. The long swim to find your own stretch of water becomes a meditation on independence, accompanied by the soundtrack of your own increasingly nervous breathing. You paddle through familiar territory, past the dam where you learn to swim, beyond the meadow where you practice stick carrying, into waters that become progressively more unknown and theoretically full of opportunities for personal growth. Your breathing gets louder as the familiar landmarks disappear behind you, and the reality of being completely on your own settles around your shoulders like a wet blanket made of responsibility. Every shadow under the water might be a hostile beaver, every current change could indicate problems with local water management, and every bird call sounds like it might be nature's way of commenting unfavorably on your chances of survival. Realizing that independence mostly means figuring things out alone while trying not to panic comes as something of a surprise to your adolescent brain, which had romanticized solo living as an adventure full of freedom and personal discovery. The reality involves a lot more uncertainty and significantly less emotional support than you'd anticipated. When you make a mistake now, there's nobody to ask for advice, nobody to help you fix it, and nobody to reassure you that everyone makes similar mistakes when they're learning. Scouting locations for your future home turns out to be exactly like house hunting, except instead of worrying about school districts and property taxes, you're evaluating water flow patterns and predator accessibility. You approach each potential site with a mental checklist that combines practical engineering considerations with the vague beaver intuition that you hope will guide you toward the right choice. Your criteria list starts simple: water that flows, trees that exist, minimal chance of dying immediately. As you explore different options, the list expands to include factors you hadn't initially considered but seem increasingly important: slope gradients, seasonal flood patterns, proximity to established beaver territories, prevailing wind direction, aesthetic appeal of the local scenery, and whether the overall vibe of the area makes you feel optimistic about your prospects for long-term happiness. You test the acoustics of your tail slap in different environments with the seriousness of a musician tuning an instrument before a performance. Each location produces a slightly different sound when you bring your tail down against the water surface. Some give you a satisfying crack that echoes off the surrounding trees, others produce a flat thud that suggests poor acoustic properties and low drama potential for future warning situations. The meadow site has excellent tree selection and a pleasing view, but your tail slap sounds weak and unconvincing. The narrow canyon location offers dramatic acoustics that make even your adolescent plops sound authoritative, but the water moves too fast and the available construction materials seem limited. The wide, shallow area downstream provides good working conditions, but fails to inspire any sense of territorial pride. You can't imagine spending decades there without becoming deeply bored. The moment you decide, this'll do, happens when you're floating in a modest bend of the creek, watching afternoon sunlight filter through aspen leaves and reflect off water that moves at a pace that suggests cooperation rather than hostility. The acoustics are respectable, the trees appear willing to participate in construction projects, and something about the proportions of the space feels right for the size of beaver you are and the size of beaver you hope to become. It's not love at first sight, more like recognition that this stretch of water could become home with sufficient effort and optimism. You can picture your future dam. Imagine the sound of water flowing through channels you haven't built yet. Envision the satisfaction of explaining your territory's features to visiting relatives who will be impressed by your independence and slightly concerned about your living conditions. You commit to making it work with the determination of someone who has burned bridges behind them and discovered that swimming back upstream against the current is more work than moving forward into unknown territory. This is your place now, for better or worse, and you're going to transform it from a random bend in a creek into something that looks like the intentional home of a competent adult beaver. Staring at flowing water and having the audacity to think you can make it stop feels like the engineering equivalent of challenging nature to a wrestling match. The creek moves past your chosen location with the casual confidence of water that has been flowing downhill for considerably longer than beavers have existed, and you're proposing to interrupt this ancient process through the application of sticks, rocks, and what you optimistically call strategic thinking. Your engineering plan, when you really examine it honestly, basically amounts to piling stuff until the water gets confused and gives up. You don't have blueprints, technical specifications, or even a clear understanding of the physics involved. What you have is instinct, determination, and a growing collection of construction materials that you've been accumulating with the enthusiasm of someone preparing for a project they don't entirely understand. You stand in the shallows, surveying your chosen construction site, and feel the weight of generational beaver knowledge pressing down on your shoulders. Somewhere in your DNA, you're confident, lies the accumulated wisdom of thousands of ancestors who successfully built dams, raised families, and died of old age rather than engineering failures. You just need to trust that instinct will guide you through the practical details of actually stopping moving water with dead tree parts. The first few sticks wash away immediately, as if the river has been expecting this challenge and has prepared appropriate responses to amateur dam building attempts. You place each stick with careful consideration, adjusting the angle, checking the foundation, making sure the positioning seems structurally sound. Then you step back to admire your work and watch as the current picks up your carefully placed materials and carries them downstream with what feels like malicious glee. After the fifth stick floats away, you begin to suspect that the river is not taking your construction project seriously. The water continues its downhill journey with unchanged enthusiasm, showing no signs of being impressed or intimidated by your efforts. You retrieve what materials you can catch and adjust your strategy from place sticks hopefully to place sticks, and then immediately pile rocks on top of them before they can escape. Persistence, or as you prefer to call it, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge reality, becomes your primary engineering tool. Every stick that washes away is simply evidence that you need more sticks. Every structural failure indicates insufficient commitment to the vision rather than fundamental problems with your approach. You develop a philosophical stance that frames setbacks as learning opportunities and catastrophic collapses as chances to try innovative new techniques. Discovering that rocks are heavy but effective comes as both a revelation and a source of significant physical exhaustion. Rocks don't wash away when you place them in strategic locations. They sink to the bottom and stay there with the dependable stubbornness of objects that have given up arguing with gravity. The trade-off is that rocks are approximately 10 times heavier than sticks, and must be transported by a beaver whose upper body strength has been developed primarily through swimming and stick chewing rather than weightlifting. You develop a rock-moving technique that combines rolling, pushing, and what can only be described as aggressive encouragement, talking to each rock as if it's a reluctant partner in your construction project. Come on, just a little further, you find yourself saying to a particularly stubborn boulder. We're almost there. Think about how good you're going to look as part of a dam. The zen of mud application turns out to be one of the more meditative aspects of dam construction. Mud doesn't argue with your placement decisions, doesn't float away when you're not looking, and molds itself obligingly around whatever structural elements you're trying to connect. Working with mud requires a different kind of patience than rock or stick placement. You have to move slowly, think ahead, and accept that you're going to spend the next several hours covered in sediment that will work its way into every crevice of your fur. There's something therapeutic about the process of gathering mud from the creek bottom, working it between your paws until it reaches the right consistency, then applying it to gaps in your construction like aquatic mortar. Your hands move in rhythm with the work, your breathing settles into the steady pattern of focused concentration, and your mind is free to wander while your body performs the ancient task of shaping earth and water into something useful. Working alone means no one can see your mistakes, but it also means no one can help you fix them. Every decision becomes your responsibility, Every structural choice reflects your judgment, and every success or failure belongs entirely to you. It's liberating and terrifying in roughly equal proportions. You can experiment with techniques that might seem questionable to more experienced builders, but you can't ask for advice when those experiments produce results that seem questionable to you. The gradual realization that you're actually getting somewhere happens so slowly that you almost miss it. One morning, you wake up and notice that the water level behind your construction zone is noticeably higher than it was the week before. Your collection of sticks, rocks, and optimistically applied mud has begun to function as an actual barrier, rather than just a pile of materials that happens to be in the water. The current still flows through and around your dam, but it's no longer flowing past it, as if your construction project doesn't exist. Water pools behind your barrier create small eddies that didn't exist before, and makes different sounds as it navigates the channels you've inadvertently created. You stand in your pond, watching water behave in ways that you've influenced, and feel the satisfaction of someone who has successfully argued with nature and reached a compromise that works for everyone involved. Stick by stick, rock by rock, handful of mud by handful of mud, you've built something that actually functions. It's not pretty, it's definitely not perfect, and it will require constant maintenance and occasional complete reconstruction. But it's yours, it works, and it represents the first major engineering project you've completed without direct supervision or immediate family intervention. You float in your newly created backwater, watching the sun set through trees that are now part of your territory, and begin to understand what it means to be a beaver who builds dams, because that's what beavers do. Your tail slap has evolved from the embarrassing wet towel sounds of your youth into something that carries actual authority. When you bring it down against the water's surface now, it produces a sharp crack that echoes off the surrounding trees and makes other creatures pause whatever they're doing to acknowledge that a competent beaver has something to say. You've discovered that the secret isn't just force, it's timing, angle, and a kind of confidence that can only come from years of practice and the gradual realization that you actually know what you're doing. The sound carries meaning now in ways it never did when you were young. A single sharp slap means attention please to your family. 2 quick slaps indicate minor problem, but I've got it handled. 3 slaps in rapid succession translates to everyone should probably pay attention to what's happening upstream. You've developed a percussion vocabulary that allows you to communicate complex engineering updates without interrupting your workflow or swimming over to have actual conversations. Other beavers in the area have begun to recognize your particular slap signature. When they hear that distinctive crack echoing across the water, they know it's coming from your territory, and they can make informed decisions about whether the communication requires their attention or is simply you conducting your daily business with appropriate professional authority. It's a subtle form of respect that you didn't even realize you were working toward until you achieved it. Tree selection has transformed from desperate grabbing at whatever vegetation happens to be convenient into something approaching an art form. You can assess the structural potential of a birch from 50 yards away, taking into account factors like trunk diameter, branch distribution, bark condition, and what experienced beavers call architectural attitude. The way a tree carries itself that suggests whether it wants to become part of a dam or would prefer to remain vertical and judgmental. You've developed preferences that go beyond simple utility. Some aspens have excellent grain patterns that make them satisfying to work with. Certain willows possess a flexibility that allows for creative engineering applications. You've learned to identify trees that will cooperate with your construction vision and trees that will resist every step of the process, making the work feel like an ongoing argument with increasingly stubborn vegetation. The selection process has become a morning ritual that combines practical assessment with aesthetic appreciation. You swim slowly through your territory, evaluating potential construction materials with the careful attention of someone choosing components for a project that will need to withstand winter floods, summer droughts, and the general indifference of weather patterns that seem designed to test beaver engineering principles. Each tree represents possibilities, challenges, and the satisfaction of turning living wood into functional architecture. The quiet satisfaction of a well-placed stick arrives in moments of perfect structural harmony, when everything clicks into place exactly as you envisioned. It's the engineering equivalent of a perfect note in a song, a moment when your intentions, the materials, and the physics of the situation align to create something that feels both inevitable and precisely right. The stick settles into position with a soft thunk. The water flow adjusts around it in exactly the way you predicted, and the overall stability of your construction increases in ways you can feel through your pores. These moments of structural satisfaction have become one of the reliable pleasures of your adult life. They happen often enough to keep you motivated through the more frustrating aspects of dam maintenance, but rarely enough that each one feels earned rather than expected. You've learned to pause and appreciate these small victories, understanding that competence is built from accumulated moments of getting things right, rather than dramatic breakthroughs or sudden revelations about the nature of beaver engineering. Other animals have begun to take you seriously, or at least stopped openly laughing at your construction efforts. The ducks that used to paddle by making what sounded suspiciously like snickering noises now treat your dam as a legitimate part of the local landscape. They use it as a convenient resting spot during migration, discuss water levels with you as if your opinions matter, and occasionally bring their ducklings by for swimming lessons in the calmer waters behind your barrier. The muskrats, who initially seemed skeptical of your engineering capabilities, now include your territory in their regular patrol routes, acknowledging your presence with respectful nods, rather than the amused tolerance they showed when you were still figuring out which end of a stick was supposed to go in the water first. Even the more territorial otters have accepted that you belong here, that your construction projects serve legitimate purposes, and that you've earned the right to be taken seriously as a member of the local aquatic engineering community. Advanced techniques in underwater carpentry without drowning have become second nature through years of practice, and an embarrassing number of near-miss experiences that taught you to respect both the complexity of the work and the unforgiving nature of running water. You can now spend extended periods working completely submerged, positioning materials with precision while managing your breathing, monitoring water pressure changes, and maintaining spatial awareness in an environment where up and down occasionally become matters of opinion rather than obvious fact. The key, you've discovered, is learning to work with your natural buoyancy rather than fighting against it. Your body wants to float, and fighting that tendency wastes energy and creates unnecessary complications. Instead, you've developed techniques that use your natural flotation as a tool, anchoring yourself strategically with your tail, using your buoyancy to help position heavy materials, and timing your breathing cycles to match the rhythm of the work, rather than trying to impose arbitrary surface intervals on complex underwater tasks. Weather prediction, through the ancient art of looking at clouds and hoping, has evolved into a surprisingly reliable system that combines traditional beaver folk wisdom with personal experience accumulated through seasons of watching how atmospheric changes affect water levels, current patterns, and construction project viability. You've learned to read the subtleties of cloud formation, wind direction changes, and the particular quality of light that indicates incoming weather systems that will impact your work schedule. Morning sky colors have become a daily forecast system. The pale yellow light that precedes calm days allows for ambitious construction projects. The heavy grey overcast that suggests prolonged drizzle means focusing on maintenance tasks that can be completed quickly between showers. The strange green-tinged light that sometimes appears before serious storms is your signal to secure loose materials, check structural weak points, and prepare for the possibility that tomorrow's work will involve rebuilding rather than building. The politics of dam maintenance require understanding when to fix problems immediately, when to rebuild entire sections, and when to simply let nature win a particular round while you focus your energy on battles you can actually win. Not every structural failure demands immediate response. Some erosion is natural and manageable. Some damage represents nature's way of improving your design through unplanned modifications that turn out to work better than your original conception. You've learned to distinguish between maintenance issues that threaten the fundamental integrity of your construction and cosmetic problems that look concerning but don't actually affect functionality. A few loose sticks washing away during high water isn't necessarily a crisis. It might be the dam's way of self-adjusting to changed flow conditions. Major structural damage that threatens the entire barrier requires immediate attention, but minor settling and seasonal adjustments can often be addressed during routine maintenance cycles. Learning that sometimes the best engineering solution is strategic procrastination has been one of your more counterintuitive professional developments. There are times when the wisest response to a problem is to wait and see how the situation develops, rather than rushing in with immediate repairs that might turn out to be unnecessary, or might even make the problem worse by interfering with natural adjustment processes. Strategic procrastination requires the confidence to trust your assessment of which problems are urgent and which can be safely monitored while you focus on higher priority tasks. It's the difference between reactive maintenance, constantly responding to every small change with immediate intervention, and proactive management, that addresses root causes and allows minor issues to resolve themselves naturally. When possible, other beavers discover your work and offer the highest compliment available in beaver society, grudging approval expressed through carefully neutral observations about your construction techniques. The first time an experienced beaver from upstream examines your dam and comments that it seems to be holding together reasonably well, you recognize the statement as significant praise disguised as casual assessment. Beavers don't offer enthusiastic encouragement to each other. They provide measured acknowledgement of competence demonstrated through practical results. Your neighbor downstream, an older beaver named Martha, who's been building dams since before you were born, stops by one morning to examine your latest structural modifications. She swims slowly around the construction zone, testing the stability with her paws, checking the water flow patterns, and making small approving noises that sound like, an interesting choice. After 20 minutes of thorough inspection, she pronounces your work not terrible and suggests that you might want to consider adjusting the angle of your main support beam by about 2 degrees. Coming from Martha, this constitutes both validation of your basic competence and valuable professional development advice. Collaborative projects emerge naturally from the practical reality that water doesn't respect individual territorial boundaries, and sometimes the most effective engineering solutions require coordination between neighboring beaver families. When the creek experiences unusual flooding that threatens everyone's construction simultaneously, informal cooperation develops as each family works to protect their own territory, while recognizing that upstream repairs benefit everyone downstream. These collaborative efforts reveal the diplomatic complexities of beaver engineering politics. Everyone has opinions about everyone else's construction techniques. Everyone believes their own approach is superior. Everyone has specific ideas about how shared projects should be organized. The trick is managing these competing perspectives while actually getting necessary work completed before the next flood cycle tests whatever solutions you've managed to implement. Working with other beavers requires translating your individual construction style into approaches that accommodate different skill levels, varying aesthetic preferences, and the inevitable personality conflicts that arise when strong-willed engineers attempt to coordinate complex projects. You learn to compromise on techniques that aren't quite how you would handle the work alone, while ensuring that the overall project meets functional requirements that everyone can live with. The delicate dance of territorial boundaries involves understanding the difference between yours, mine, and, let's pretend we didn't see each other, zones that allow neighboring beaver families to coexist without constant conflict over construction rights, material access, and water management decisions. Your territory ends where your neighbor's begins, but the practical boundaries involve complex negotiations about shared resources, overlapping interests, and the maintenance of polite fictions that preserve everyone's dignity. There are trees that clearly belong to your territory, and trees that obviously fall within your neighbor's domain. Then there are trees that exist in the ambiguous middle ground, where harvesting rights depend on factors like who needs the materials most urgently, who spotted the tree first, and whether taking it would create obvious problems for the other party. These boundary negotiations happen through subtle signals, diplomatic conversations, and occasional direct discussions when circumstances require explicit agreement about resource allocation. Building relationships through the universal language of complaining about water levels creates bonds with other beavers based on shared professional frustrations and the mutual understanding that nature doesn't always cooperate with beaver construction schedules. Too much water washes away months of careful work. Too little water makes construction difficult and reduces the effectiveness of completed dams. Just the right amount of water creates perfect working conditions that last approximately 3 days before changing again, for reasons that seem designed to test your patience. These conversations about water management challenges serve multiple social functions simultaneously. They allow beavers to share practical information about seasonal patterns, construction techniques, and potential solutions to common problems. They provide opportunities to establish professional credibility through demonstrated knowledge of local conditions and engineering principles. Most importantly, they create shared experiences of struggling with the same fundamental challenges that all beaver families face, regardless of their individual territorial arrangements or construction philosophies. Attracting a mate through the time-honored tradition of demonstrating dam competency turns out to be more complex than simply building impressive structures and waiting for appropriate romantic responses. Potential partners evaluate not just the quality of your current construction, but your problem-solving approach, your resource management skills, your compatibility as a collaborative engineering partner, and whether your personality suggests you'd be tolerable to live with during the long winter months when there's limited opportunity to escape each other's company. Your first serious romantic prospect, a beaver named Carol from the territory upstream, expresses initial interest after observing your innovative approach to water flow management during the spring flood season. She compliments your work with the kind of specific technical appreciation that indicates genuine understanding of the engineering principles involved, rather than polite social acknowledgement of your construction efforts. When someone notices that you've successfully redirected problematic currents through strategic placement of carefully angled support structures, you know they're paying the right kind of attention. Courtship rituals evolve naturally from professional interactions into personal demonstrations of increasingly ambitious construction capabilities. You find yourself selecting branches that are slightly larger than necessary for your current projects, carrying them past Carol's territory with casual displays of strength and engineering confidence. She responds by implementing sophisticated water management techniques that seem designed to showcase her problem-solving skills and creative approach to complex hydraulic challenges. The courtship dance involves a gradual escalation of impressive construction demonstrations, each slightly more ambitious than the previous display. You rebuild a section of dam that was functioning perfectly well, but rebuild it with materials and techniques that demonstrate your mastery of advanced engineering principles. Carol responds by creating an elegant fish ladder that serves no practical purpose in her current location, but showcases her understanding of aquatic architecture and her ability to think beyond basic dam construction. The awkward transition from impressive neighbor to life partner in aquatic construction requires navigating the shift from professional admiration to personal compatibility while maintaining the mutual respect that attracted you to each other in the first place. You discover that Carol's construction techniques, which looked so elegant from a distance, involve work habits that don't entirely mesh with your own preferred approaches to project organization and material management. She prefers to complete entire construction phases before moving on to the next stage of a project. You like to work on multiple aspects simultaneously, adjusting your approach as you discover how different elements interact with each other. She believes in thorough planning, followed by systematic execution. You favor adaptive construction that responds to changing conditions and unexpected opportunities. Learning to coordinate these different work styles requires patience, compromise, and occasional agreements to work on separate projects when your approaches prove incompatible. Learning that relationships require maintenance, much like dams but with more feelings, introduces emotional complexity to your previously straightforward existence, focused primarily on engineering challenges and seasonal survival requirements. Carol has opinions about your construction priorities that don't always align with your assessment of which projects need immediate attention. She has feelings about your work schedule that require consideration even when those feelings conflict with optimal construction timing based on weather conditions and material availability. The maintenance required for successful relationships involves regular communication about project planning, collaborative decision-making about resource allocation, and ongoing negotiation about how to balance individual construction preferences with shared territorial management responsibilities. Unlike dam maintenance, relationship maintenance doesn't follow predictable seasonal patterns and doesn't always respond to straightforward problem-solving approaches. Teaching your own kits the basics while trying not to laugh at their complete incompetence provides daily entertainment and occasional existential insights into the nature of acquired knowledge versus genetic programming. Your offspring arrive in the world with enormous confidence in their natural beaver abilities and absolutely no practical experience with the gap between instinctive understanding and actual skill development. They approach their first swimming lessons with the enthusiasm of creatures who assume that being born a beaver automatically confers swimming competence. Watching them make the same mistakes you made, but somehow worse, gives you new appreciation for the patience your own parents demonstrated during your learning process. Your kits manage to discover entirely new ways to get tangled in underwater vegetation, create previously unknown methods for losing construction materials, and develop original techniques for falling off dams that you hadn't realized were physically possible. Their capacity for creative failure exceeds anything you achieved during your own awkward adolescence. Kit number 1, who you privately call enthusiastic, approaches every task with boundless energy and absolutely no attention to practical details like structural integrity or basic physics. She carries sticks that are 3 times her body weight, attempts to place them in locations that defy engineering logic, and expresses genuine surprise when her constructions immediately fall apart. Her confidence in her abilities remains unshaken by repeated evidence that her techniques need refinement. Kit number 2, cautious, analyzes every situation extensively before taking any action, then takes actions that demonstrate complete failure to understand the situations he's been analyzing. He can spend 20 minutes examining a stick from every angle, discussing its structural properties with anyone who will listen, then attempt to use it in applications that ignore everything he's just observed about its characteristics. His theoretical knowledge consistently fails to connect with practical implementation. The patience required to explain why sticks work better than leaves for structural support tests your ability to maintain educational composure while addressing questions that seem designed to challenge your faith in the basic intelligence of your own offspring. But leaves are more comfortable. Your kit argues, as if dam construction is primarily about providing cozy resting spots for tired beavers, rather than controlling water flow through strategic placement of materials that won't disintegrate when wet. You find yourself having conversations that your parents undoubtedly had with you, explaining fundamental principles that seem obvious to your adult understanding, but apparently require explicit instruction for young beavers whose instincts haven't yet connected with practical experience. Sticks stay where you put them, you hear yourself saying with the patience of someone explaining that water flows downhill. Leaves go where the water takes them. Realizing you've become the adult beaver you used to find intimidatingly competent happens gradually through accumulated moments of your own children, seeking your advice, accepting your technical guidance, and treating your construction decisions as examples of professional expertise rather than arbitrary adult preferences. When your kit asks how you knew to place a particular support beam at exactly that angle, you provide explanations that demonstrate understanding of engineering principles you didn't even know you possessed. Your transformation from confused young beaver to competent adult happens so gradually that you don't notice the transition until you're on the other side of it, offering guidance to the next generation with the calm authority that you remember admiring in your own parents and extended family. The knowledge that once seemed mysterious and intimidating has become practical understanding that you can share through patient instruction and demonstration. Spring floods arrive with the casual indifference of natural forces that don't care about the months of careful construction work they're about to wash downstream. You wake up one morning to discover that water levels have risen 3 feet overnight. Your carefully maintained dam is completely submerged, and significant portions of your winter's construction projects are now decorating territories several miles downstream. The flooding represents nature's annual reminder that beaver engineering operates at the pleasure of larger hydrological systems that can override your best efforts without notice. Your response to spring flood damage has evolved from panic and immediate reconstruction, attempts to philosophical acceptance and strategic assessment of what's worth rebuilding versus what might be better redesigned based on new information about seasonal water patterns. Some structural damage represents opportunity to implement improvements you've been considering, but hadn't prioritized during normal maintenance cycles. Major floods clear the slate and provide chances to rebuild better, rather than simply restoring previous configurations. The cleanup process involves swimming through your territory, inventorying what survived, what disappeared completely, and what ended up in interesting new locations that suggest possibilities for creative reuse. Some materials wash downstream and become someone else's problem or opportunity. Other materials get deposited in locations where they actually work better than their original placement, creating accidental improvements to your overall construction design. Summer maintenance sessions in the pleasant warmth become the most enjoyable aspect of your annual construction cycle. The combination of comfortable working conditions, stable water levels, and ample daylight hours creates optimal circumstances for ambitious projects, detailed repairs, and experimental construction techniques that you wouldn't attempt during more challenging seasonal conditions. Your work efficiency increases dramatically when you're not fighting cold water, unpredictable weather, or limited visibility. Summer projects tend to be more creative and less urgent than spring reconstruction or fall preparation work. You have time to consider aesthetic improvements, experiment with new materials, and implement structural refinements that enhance both functionality and your own satisfaction with your territory's appearance. The pleasant working conditions allow for contemplative construction sessions where you can focus on craftsmanship rather than simply getting necessary tasks completed before weather conditions deteriorate. Fall preparation brings the annual panic of, do we have enough food stored? Combined with the more rational assessment of winter-proofing requirements for your construction projects and living spaces. The approach of cold weather creates urgency around tasks that seemed perfectly manageable during the relaxed pace of summer maintenance, but suddenly become critical preparations for surviving months when construction work becomes difficult or impossible. Food storage calculations involve estimating consumption requirements for your family, accounting for the possibility that winter might last longer than average, and balancing storage capacity against the practical limitations of available space and preservation techniques. You find yourself swimming through your territory, conducting inventory assessments with the focused attention of someone whose survival depends on accurate resource management. Winter's quiet months provide the first real rest you've experienced since establishing your independent territory. Construction projects pause except for emergency repairs. Food gathering shifts from active harvesting to managing stored supplies. The pace of daily life slows to match the reduced daylight hours and the energy conservation requirements of cold weather survival. For the first time in months, you can float in your pond without feeling compelled to identify tasks that need immediate attention. The winter quiet creates space for reflection on the year's accomplishments, assessment of construction techniques that worked well or need refinement, and planning for spring projects that will address problems you've identified during the season's maintenance cycles. It's the closest thing to vacation that exists in beaver life, a time when survival requirements allow for contemplation rather than demanding constant action and problem-solving attention. Young beavers now come to you for advice, which is both flattering and terrifying in ways you hadn't anticipated when you were struggling with your own adolescent engineering disasters. They approach your territory with the respectful hesitation of creatures seeking wisdom from someone who has clearly figured out how to make this whole beaver thing work, and you find yourself in the peculiar position of being expected to have answers to questions that you remember asking yourself just a few seasons ago. The transition from beaver who needs help to beaver who provides help apparently happened while you weren't paying attention, somewhere between learning to build competent dams and actually building them. Their questions range from practical construction concerns that you actually can address to philosophical inquiries about the meaning of beaver existence that make you wonder if you should have spent more time thinking about the bigger picture instead of just focusing on keeping your dam from washing away. How do you know where to place the foundation stones is a question you can answer with specific technical guidance based on years of trial and error. Why do we build dams at all requires the kind of existential wisdom that you're not entirely sure you possess, despite having spent decades engaged in the activity in question. The young beaver who asks about foundation placement, an earnest female kit named Penny, who reminds you uncomfortably of your own overeager adolescent self, listens to your explanation with the intense attention of someone taking mental notes for future reference. You hear yourself explaining concepts about water pressure distribution, seasonal flow patterns, and structural stability using vocabulary and understanding that you don't remember acquiring. Apparently, decades of practical experience create knowledge that accumulates gradually until you wake up one day and discover you've become competent without noticing the transition. You want to feel how the current pushes against the rock when you place it. You find yourself saying, demonstrating with a piece of granite that you've selected for its educational properties rather than any immediate construction need. The water will tell you whether your placement will hold through spring floods or wash out with the first serious current change. Penny nods with the solemnity of someone receiving sacred knowledge, then immediately selects a rock that will obviously move at the first sign of elevated water levels. The terrifying aspect of being consulted for advice comes from the realization that these young beavers will base their construction decisions on your recommendations, and their success or failure will partly reflect the accuracy of your guidance. When you were learning, your mistakes only affected your own projects. Now your suggestions influence other beavers' work, and the possibility that you might be confidently wrong about something important creates a new category of responsibility that you hadn't considered during your own education. You find yourself hedging your advice with disclaimers and alternative approaches, trying to provide helpful guidance while acknowledging that local conditions vary and what works in your territory might need adjustment in different locations. This technique works well in my experience, you hear yourself saying, but you'll need to adapt it based on your particular water conditions and available materials. It's wisdom that comes from understanding the limitations of universal solutions to problems that are always influenced by specific environmental factors. The young beavers who seek your counsel represent a cross-section of personality types and competence levels that reminds you of the diversity within your own generation during your learning years. There's the overconfident kid who believes that enthusiasm can substitute for experience, the anxious perfectionist who wants detailed instructions for every possible scenario, and the quietly competent youngster who asks thoughtful questions that suggest they're already developing good instincts about construction work. Your dams have stood long enough to become part of the landscape in ways that extend beyond simple structural presence into ecological integration that transforms your engineering projects from artificial interruptions of natural processes into components of the local environmental system. The pond behind your main dam has developed its own ecosystem of aquatic plants, fish populations, and bird communities that depend on the habitat you've created and maintained through decades of patient construction work. When you first built your primary barrier, the area behind it was simply flooded creek bottom with some confused vegetation and displaced wildlife that hadn't yet figured out how to use the changed environment. Now, 20 years later, that same area supports a complex web of interdependent species that have adapted to the specific conditions your engineering created. Cattails grow in the shallow areas where sediment has accumulated. Frogs breed in the quiet backwaters that your flow control systems maintain. Fish species that prefer still water have established populations that attract fishing birds, who now consider your pond part of their regular hunting territory. Trees have grown up around the edges of your pond, their roots reaching into the enriched soil that accumulates behind your barriers. These aren't the same trees that were there when you arrived. Those were mostly cleared for construction materials or died from the changed water conditions. The current forest represents a new generation of vegetation that has grown up within the modified environment your dams created, adapted from the beginning to the conditions that your engineering maintains. Wildlife trails converge at your water sources, creating transportation networks that connect different parts of the forest through the aquatic infrastructure you've built and maintained. Deer come to drink at the shallow areas you've inadvertently created through strategic material placement. Small mammals use your dam structures as bridges across the creek. Your construction projects have become reference points that other animals use for navigation, shelter, and resource access, integrating your work into the broader ecological community in ways you never planned but have come to appreciate. The ecosystem has adjusted around your work to the point where you're no longer fighting nature, but collaborating with environmental processes that have learned to incorporate your construction activities into their seasonal rhythms. Spring floods still challenge your engineering, but they do so in predictable ways that allow both you and the natural systems to adapt and respond without the dramatic conflicts that characterized your early construction efforts. Plants grow in patterns that complement your dam structures, providing additional stability through root systems that reinforce your construction while benefiting from the changed water conditions your barriers create. The relationship between your engineering work and the natural environment has evolved from adversarial problem-solving to cooperative development of mutually beneficial infrastructure that serves both beaver needs and broader ecological functions. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when your construction projects are working in harmony with natural processes versus when they're creating tensions that will eventually require resolution through either structural modifications or natural adjustments that might not preserve your intended functionality. A healthy ecosystem around your dams includes appropriate vegetation growth, stable wildlife populations, and water quality that supports the aquatic life you want to encourage. The quiet pride of a job that outlasts you settles into your consciousness gradually, as you realize that your construction projects will continue functioning long after you're no longer around to maintain them. The techniques you've developed, the structural solutions you've implemented, and the understanding of local conditions that you've accumulated through decades of practical experience will influence this stretch of water for generations beyond your own lifetime. Your dams represent permanent improvements to the local environment that will benefit future beaver families, wildlife populations, and the overall health of the watershed, regardless of whether anyone remembers who originally built them. The satisfaction of creating something that serves purposes larger than your immediate needs provides a sense of accomplishment that transcends the daily routine of maintenance and repair work. The structures you've built have reached a level of stability and integration with natural processes that suggest they'll continue functioning effectively, even without the constant attention and adjustment that newer construction requires. Your oldest dam, built during your first years of independent construction, now operates with the smooth efficiency of infrastructure that has found its equilibrium with local conditions and seasonal variations. Teaching techniques you've refined over years of trial and mostly error requires translating practical knowledge that you've internalized through experience into explicit instructions that can be understood and applied by beavers who haven't yet developed their own intuitive understanding of construction principles. The difference between knowing how to do something and knowing how to explain how to do something turns out to be more significant than you'd expected when you first agreed to take on students. Your technique for selecting foundation stones, developed through countless attempts and gradual refinement based on which approaches produced lasting results, involves a complex assessment of rock size, shape, weight distribution, and placement angle that you perform almost automatically. The process combines visual evaluation, tactile testing, and intuitive judgment about how each stone will interact with water flow patterns and seasonal pressure variations. Explaining this integrated assessment to a young beaver requires breaking down knowledge that feels instinctive into sequential steps that can be learned and practiced systematically. You want rocks that feel stable when you test them with your paw. You hear yourself explaining to a group of 3 young beavers who have requested a comprehensive workshop on foundation construction techniques. You demonstrate the subtle pressure testing that determines whether a stone will shift under load or maintain its position through seasonal water level changes, applying force from different angles while monitoring how the rock responds to various types of stress. But not so stable that they can't settle into the sediment layer and develop proper anchoring with the creek bottom. You continue, knowing that this distinction represents one of the more subtle aspects of foundation work that typically requires considerable experience to master. You want rocks that will adapt to their placement location while maintaining structural integrity. The young beavers nod seriously, then proceed to select stones that meet none of your criteria, while clearly believing they're following your instructions perfectly. The teaching process reveals how much of your expertise exists in forms that resist simple verbal explanation. The way you assess water flow patterns involves visual cues, sound recognition, and tactile feedback that combine into judgments about current strength, seasonal variation, and structural requirements that work effectively for decision-making but challenge clear communication. You find yourself searching for words to describe processes that you normally complete through integrated sensory evaluation that happens too quickly for conscious analysis. Listen to how the water sounds when it hits this rock versus that one, you suggest, trying to convey the audio information that helps you evaluate current patterns and pressure distribution. The pitch changes based on depth and flow rate, and those changes tell you how your construction will affect overall stream dynamics. Your students listen carefully, hear obvious differences in water sounds, but struggle to interpret those differences in ways that inform construction decisions. Watching the next generation innovate in ways you never considered provides both pride in their creativity and occasional concern about their departure from techniques you've spent decades perfecting. Your students take your foundation placement principles and apply them to construction challenges that didn't exist during your own learning period, developing solutions that work but don't exactly match the approaches you would have chosen. Penny, the earnest young beaver who asked the original foundation questions, creates a fish ladder integrated into her dam design that serves multiple functions simultaneously, controlling water flow, providing wildlife access, and creating aesthetic appeal that makes her construction projects more visually interesting than purely functional engineering typically achieves. Her innovation represents advancement beyond your own techniques, but it also involves risks and complexities that your more conservative approaches were designed to avoid. That's an interesting design choice, you comment when she shows you her completed project, trying to balance encouragement for her creativity with gentle guidance about potential structural issues. Have you considered how that configuration will handle ice pressure during winter freeze cycles? Her confidence wavers slightly as she realizes she hasn't thought through all the seasonal implications of her innovative approach. The satisfaction of knowing your particular stretch of water will be cared for comes from watching capable young beavers establish their own territories nearby, implementing construction techniques that build on your approaches, while adapting to their own local conditions and personal preferences. The knowledge that your section of the watershed will continue to benefit from competent beaver management provides continuity that extends your own work beyond the limitations of your individual lifetime. Your former student establishes her territory immediately downstream from your own, creating a collaborative relationship where your water management decisions affect her construction conditions, while her dam modifications influence the flow patterns in your pond. The cooperation required to coordinate these interconnected projects demonstrates that your teaching has produced not just technical competence, but also the diplomatic skills necessary for successful beaver community management. The downstream collaboration requires ongoing communication about construction schedules, material usage, and maintenance activities that affect shared water resources. When you need to release additional flow for construction work, you coordinate with Penny to ensure that the increased water volume won't interfere with her own projects. When she plans modifications that will change the flow patterns entering your territory, You discuss potential impacts and suggest timing that will minimize disruption to your established systems. Learning when to step back and let others take over requires recognizing when your experience-based caution begins to limit, rather than enhance, construction projects that would benefit from the energy and innovation that younger beavers bring to engineering challenges. Your tendency to avoid techniques that haven't been thoroughly tested conflicts with their willingness to experiment with approaches that might produce better results than traditional methods. The transition from active leadership to advisory consultation happens gradually, as you discover that your role in major construction projects shifts from primary engineer to experienced consultant who provides guidance when requested, but doesn't insist on controlling implementation decisions. Your knowledge remains valuable, but your judgment about how to apply that knowledge becomes one voice among several rather than the final authority on construction choices. You learn to offer advice in ways that preserve the decision-making autonomy of younger beavers while providing them with the benefit of your experience. In my experience, this approach tends to work well under these conditions. Becomes your standard phrasing for sharing technical knowledge without implying that alternative approaches are necessarily inferior. You might want to consider potential complications like allows you to raise concerns without demanding specific responses to those concerns. The process of transferring responsibility requires patience with decisions that you wouldn't make yourself, and restraint when you observe approaches that seem likely to produce problems you could help them avoid. Sometimes, the most valuable learning experiences come from working through challenges independently, even when more experienced guidance could prevent those challenges from arising in the first place. Looking back at decades of the same routine, with something approaching fondness surprises you with the realization that repetition doesn't necessarily equal monotony. When the repeated activities serve meaningful purposes and provide ongoing opportunities for refinement and mastery. Your daily routine of dam inspection, maintenance assessment, material gathering, and construction work has remained essentially unchanged for years, but your understanding and skill within that routine has evolved continuously, creating variety within consistency that keeps familiar tasks interesting. The morning swim through your territory that once represented anxious assessment of potential problems has become a peaceful meditation that combines practical evaluation with appreciation for the environmental stability your work has created. You still check for structural issues, flow pattern changes, and maintenance requirements, but you do so with the confidence of someone who understands the normal variations in your system and can distinguish between minor seasonal adjustments and significant problems that require immediate attention. Your inspection route has become as familiar as the interior of your lodge, but that familiarity allows you to notice subtle changes that would escape less experienced observation. The way morning light reflects off a particular section of water tells you about overnight sediment changes. The sound of flow through your spillway indicates whether yesterday's maintenance work achieved the intended results. Small variations in vegetation growth patterns suggest modifications in local drainage that might affect long-term structural stability. Each season brings the same basic challenges: flood preparation, summer construction projects, fall storage activities, winter maintenance. But your approach to these recurring requirements reflects accumulated wisdom about which strategies work reliably, which problems resolve themselves naturally, and which interventions produce the best long-term results. What felt like overwhelming complexity during your early years now feels like familiar rhythm that provides structure and purpose to your daily activities. Spring flood preparation, for example, has evolved from panicked attempts to reinforce everything simultaneously into strategic assessment of which structures need immediate attention, which can wait for more convenient maintenance schedules, and which are better served by allowing natural processes to make adjustments that improve overall system performance. You've learned to distinguish between preparation activities that meaningfully reduce flood risk and busy work that makes you feel productive without actually improving your readiness for high water conditions. The changes you've witnessed over decades of consistent observation create a time-lapse perspective on environmental transformation that reveals patterns invisible to shorter attention spans. Trees that were saplings when you first established your territory now provide shade for your pond and serve as construction material for major projects. The forest around your water has matured, changed species composition, and adapted to the modified hydrological conditions your dams created. You remember when the large oak that now dominates the eastern shore of your pond was a young tree barely taller than your lodge. Its growth reflects not just the passage of time but also the enriched soil conditions that developed behind your dams as sediment accumulated and created fertile growing medium for vegetation that benefits from stable water access. The tree's current size and health represent a collaboration between your engineering work and natural growth processes that neither could have achieved independently. Seasonal patterns have varied within predictable ranges, with some years bringing exceptional floods that tested your engineering limits, and other years providing drought conditions that revealed aspects of your construction that only become visible when water levels drop below normal ranges. Your memory of these variations allows you to assess current conditions within historical context, distinguishing between unusual circumstances and normal fluctuations that inexperienced beavers might interpret as crises. The drought of your 7th year, when water levels dropped to exposures that revealed the foundations of your oldest constructions, taught you about the long-term settling patterns of your engineering work and the importance of building structural elements that remain stable even when supporting conditions change dramatically. The exceptional flooding of your 12th year demonstrated the effectiveness of overflow channels that you'd built as insurance against extreme conditions but had never seen tested by actual extreme water volumes. Wildlife populations have changed in response to the habitat modifications your construction projects created, with some species thriving in the wetland conditions behind your dams, while others adapted to different areas as their preferred environments shifted. The bird communities that nest around your pond include species that weren't present when you first began building, attracted by the aquatic habitat and food sources that your engineering work made available. The great blue herons that now fish regularly in your shallow areas arrived during your 5th year, after fish populations had established themselves in the still water conditions your dams created. Their presence represents successful habitat creation that supports wildlife species beyond your immediate beaver community. Watching them hunt in water that exists because of your construction work provides daily confirmation that your engineering serves purposes larger than your own survival and comfort. Understanding that boring might actually be another word for peaceful represents a philosophical shift from your younger self's expectation that meaningful life should involve constant excitement and dramatic challenges to an appreciation for the satisfaction that comes from competent handling of predictable responsibilities. The routine aspects of beaver existence that once seemed limiting now feel like the foundation for a stable and purposeful life that allows for deep engagement with familiar activities rather than constant adaptation to new circumstances. The predictability that you once interpreted as monotony now provides the security that allows you to focus on refinement and mastery rather than constantly adapting to new crises and unfamiliar challenges. Your expertise within familiar parameters enables you to achieve levels of craftsmanship and efficiency that wouldn't be possible if you were continuously learning new skills or adjusting to different environments. Your construction work now incorporates subtleties of design and execution that reflect decades of experience with how materials behave under different conditions, how structures interact with seasonal changes, and how engineering decisions affect both immediate functionality and long-term maintenance requirements. The dams you build now are more sophisticated in their integration of structural elements, more efficient in their use of materials, and more elegant in their accommodation of natural processes than anything you could have achieved during your earlier years. The realization that you've spent your entire life doing exactly what you were built to do arrives not as a limitation, but as a form of profound satisfaction that comes from alignment between natural capabilities and chosen activities. Your physical design, instinctive behaviors, and acquired skills have all developed toward the same purpose of creating and maintaining aquatic habitat through strategic construction and patient maintenance. Your teeth evolved for cutting wood, and you've spent decades perfecting techniques for selecting, processing, and utilizing wooden construction materials. Your tail developed for water manipulation, and you've learned to use it for communication, propulsion, construction assistance, and environmental assessment. Your hands adapted for construction work, and you've refined their capabilities through countless hours of material handling, structural assembly, and precision placement of engineering components. Your brain organized itself around the spatial reasoning and planning skills necessary for successful engineering projects, and you've exercised those capabilities through increasingly complex construction challenges that required integration of multiple variables, including water dynamics, material properties, structural mechanics, and long-term maintenance considerations. The match between your biological equipment and your daily activities represents a completeness that many creatures never achieve, spending their lives struggling against their nature, rather than expressing it fully through appropriate applications. The development of true expertise in dam construction reveals itself not through dramatic improvements or sudden insights, but through gradual refinement of judgment that allows you to make better decisions with less conscious effort. Your assessment of construction sites now incorporates dozens of variables simultaneously: soil composition, drainage patterns, seasonal variation, material availability, maintenance, accessibility, and long-term structural integrity in evaluations that happen almost instantaneously and produce recommendations that prove correct far more often than your early attempts at engineering analysis. This integrated judgment represents knowledge that exists below the level of conscious articulation, but emerges reliably when needed for practical decision-making. You can look at a potential dam site and immediately understand the construction challenges it will present, the materials it will require, the seasonal maintenance it will need, and the probable longevity of structures built in that location. This understanding comes not from applying learned rules, but from pattern recognition based on decades of experience with similar situations. The evolution of your construction techniques reflects not just improved skill, but also deeper understanding of the relationship between immediate construction goals and long-term system performance. Your early dams focused primarily on stopping water flow through the most direct methods available. Your current construction integrates water control with habitat creation, maintenance, accessibility, structural longevity, and environmental compatibility in designs that serve multiple purposes while requiring less ongoing intervention to maintain effectiveness. You've learned to think in terms of systems rather than individual structures, understanding how each construction decision affects the overall performance of your territorial infrastructure. A modification to your upstream barrier influences flow patterns at your main dam. Changes in sediment management affect the stability of downstream structures. Material selection for one project impacts resource availability for future maintenance throughout your territory. The patience that comes with experience manifests in your willingness to complete construction projects gradually, when gradual development produces better results than rushed implementation. Some structural improvements work best when implemented over multiple seasons, allowing natural processes to integrate with construction elements before adding additional complexity. Your current projects often span years from initial conception to final completion, with extended development schedules that optimize results rather than minimizing construction time. Your relationship with seasonal rhythms has deepened beyond simple accommodation to different working conditions, into strategic utilization of natural cycles that enhance the effectiveness of your construction activities. Spring flooding provides opportunities to test structural modifications under stress conditions and identify improvements needed for long-term stability. Summer's stable water levels allow for precision work that requires careful measurement and exact placement of structural elements. Fall preparation activities now integrate construction work with storage activities in ways that maximize efficiency and minimize redundant effort. Winter's reduced activity level provides time for planning and preparation that improves the effectiveness of construction work during more active seasons. Your annual cycle has become a coordinated sequence of activities that support each other, rather than a series of independent responses to changing conditions. The development of aesthetic appreciation for your own work surprises you with the realization that functional construction can also achieve visual beauty, when structural requirements are met with elegant solutions that enhance rather than compromise the natural environment. Your best dams integrate seamlessly with their settings, appearing to emerge naturally from local conditions, while actually representing sophisticated engineering that required extensive planning and precise execution. This aesthetic dimension of construction work adds satisfaction beyond functional success, creating structures that please your visual sense while serving their intended engineering purposes. You've learned to balance efficiency with elegance, achieving construction goals through methods that enhance rather than detract from the natural beauty of your territorial landscape. The accumulated experience of decades in construction work has taught you that the most effective solutions are often the simplest ones, and that complexity should be added to projects only when it serves clear purposes that justify the additional effort and maintenance requirements. Your early enthusiasm for ambitious construction projects has evolved into appreciation for designs that achieve necessary results through straightforward methods that remain effective over extended time periods. Simple solutions prove more durable because they involve fewer components that can fail, fewer interactions that can produce unexpected problems, and fewer maintenance requirements that can accumulate into overwhelming workloads. The most successful elements of your territorial infrastructure are often the most basic ones. Sturdy barriers, built with appropriate materials in suitable locations, using time-tested techniques that accommodate local conditions, without attempting to override natural processes. This preference for simplicity doesn't represent reduced ambition, but rather refined understanding of which complexities contribute meaningfully to construction goals, and which complexities create problems without producing proportional benefits. You've learned to distinguish between sophistication that enhances functionality and complication that satisfies your engineering curiosity without improving practical results. Your current construction philosophy emphasizes working with natural processes rather than against them, finding solutions that accomplish Beaver engineering goals while accommodating the environmental forces that will ultimately determine the longevity and effectiveness of your structures. This approach requires more careful site analysis and more thoughtful design work, but it produces infrastructure that requires less ongoing maintenance and achieves better integration with local ecological systems. The patience to pursue simple solutions that work reliably has replaced the urgency to implement impressive projects that might fail under stress conditions. Your reputation within the local Beaver community now rests on the consistent performance of your territorial infrastructure rather than the ambition of your construction projects, and you've discovered that reliability commands more respect than innovation when other Beavers evaluate engineering competence. The transition from competent individual Beaver to recognized expert within the broader community brings responsibilities that extend beyond your own territorial management to include consultation on engineering challenges facing other Beaver families and participation in collaborative projects that affect watershed management throughout your region. Your expertise has become a resource that benefits the entire local Beaver population, and your decisions increasingly influence construction standards and techniques adopted by other engineers. Young Beavers from territories throughout the watershed now seek your guidance on construction challenges that exceed their current skill levels, and your recommendations affect the success of engineering projects across a much larger area than your own territorial boundaries. This expanded influence requires careful consideration of how your advice will translate to different local conditions, different skill levels, and different resource constraints than those that characterize your own construction environment. The diplomatic aspects of community consultation prove more complex than the technical aspects, as you navigate relationships with adult Beavers who have their own construction philosophies and territorial priorities, while maintaining helpful relationships that serve the broader community. Your advice must be offered in ways that respect the autonomy of other engineers, while providing them with useful guidance based on your experience with similar challenges. Regional collaborative projects, such as coordinated flood control efforts that require cooperation among multiple Beaver families, test your ability to translate individual construction expertise into group engineering projects that serve shared interests. These collaborations require compromise between different technical approaches, coordination of construction schedules, and agreement about resource allocation in ways that balance individual territorial needs with collective watershed management goals. Your participation in these larger projects provides opportunities to learn from other experienced engineers, whose techniques and insights differ from your own approaches, while contributing your own expertise to collective problem-solving efforts that address challenges too large for individual territorial management. The exchange of knowledge that occurs during collaborative construction enriches your own understanding while advancing the overall level of engineering competence within your regional Beaver community. The recognition that comes with established expertise also brings expectations for leadership during crisis situations that threaten multiple territories simultaneously. When exceptional flood conditions or drought circumstances create challenges that exceed normal individual management capabilities, the community looks to experienced engineers for guidance about coordinated responses that can minimize damage and preserve essential infrastructure throughout the affected region. The pond at sunset reflects your life's work in ways that combine literal imagery with metaphorical satisfaction. As the day's last light illuminates water that moves through channels you've shaped, around structures you've built, and into patterns that exist because of choices you've made and maintained through decades of patient attention. The reflection shows not just your physical construction projects, but the accumulated result of countless decisions, repairs, improvements, and adaptations that represent your response to this particular place and its seasonal requirements. The surface of the water captures the colors of the evening sky, creating a mirror that doubles the visual impact of the landscape while reminding you that your pond exists as a collaboration between your engineering efforts and natural processes that provide the water, weather, and seasonal changes that make your construction meaningful. Without the water, your dams would be pointless piles of sticks and rocks. Without your dams, the water would continue downstream, without creating the habitat and resources that define your territory. The specific quality of light during evening hours illuminates aspects of your construction that remain hidden during other times of day, revealing the texture of bark on structural elements, the patterns of sediment accumulation that indicate successful flow management, and the subtle integration of natural and constructed elements that characterizes successful beaver engineering. These visual details, visible only under particular lighting conditions, remind you of the aesthetic dimension of functional construction work. The gentle sound of water moving through channels you've shaped provides a constant audio reminder of your influence on environmental processes that will continue long after your direct involvement ends. The specific tones and rhythms of water flowing over your spillways, around your deflection barriers, and through your control structures create a unique acoustic signature that identifies your territory as clearly as visual landmarks. Each construction decision you've made contributes to the particular sound pattern that characterizes your pond. The pitch of water falling over your main dam, the gurgling rhythm of flow through your fish ladder, the quiet lapping of waves against the shores you've modified through strategic material placement. These sounds represent the audible expression of your life's work, a continuous performance of your engineering choices that plays 24 hours a day throughout all seasons. The acoustic environment of your territory changes subtly, with seasonal variations in water volume, ice formation, and vegetation growth. But the underlying sound patterns remain consistent because they reflect structural decisions that accommodate seasonal change while maintaining functional effectiveness. The sounds of your pond in winter differ from summer acoustics, but both seasonal variations play out within the context of flow patterns that you've established through decades of construction and maintenance work. Other beavers continue the work, each adding their own small improvements to construction techniques, habitat management approaches, and community cooperation strategies that build on the foundation of knowledge you've contributed while adapting to changing conditions and developing innovations that extend beyond your own capabilities. Your influence on beaver engineering in your region will continue through the beavers you've taught, the techniques you've demonstrated, and the construction projects that serve as examples of successful approaches to common challenges. The young beavers who learned construction principles by observing your work will apply those principles to their own territorial challenges, modifying and improving your techniques as they gain experience with their own local conditions. Their innovations will influence the next generation of beaver builders, creating a continuous development of engineering knowledge that incorporates your contributions while extending beyond your individual understanding. Penny, your most promising student, has already begun developing construction techniques that improve upon methods she learned from you, and her innovations represent the evolution of beaver engineering knowledge through generational transfer and creative adaptation. Her approach to integrated habitat construction combines your structural techniques with aesthetic and ecological considerations that reflect her own priorities and the different environmental conditions that characterize her territory. The construction standards and quality expectations that you've established through consistent production of reliable infrastructure will influence beaver engineering in your region long after your direct involvement ends. Young beavers who grow up seeing your dams as examples of standard construction quality will internalize those standards as baseline expectations for their own work, raising the overall level of engineering competence within the community. The quiet satisfaction of a life spent building something useful, one stick at a time, settles around your consciousness, like comfortable clothing that fits perfectly and serves its intended purpose without calling attention to itself. Your existence has been dedicated to the fundamental beaver activity of improving habitat through patient construction work, and the accumulated result of decades of daily effort represents a meaningful contribution to both your own survival and the broader ecological community that benefits from your engineering projects. Each stick you've placed, each rock you've positioned, each handful of mud you've applied represents a small decision that contributed to larger purposes of water management, habitat creation, and environmental stability. The individual actions seemed routine and unremarkable while you were performing them, but their accumulated effect has transformed a section of creek into a complex aquatic ecosystem that supports wildlife diversity and provides resources that wouldn't exist without your patient attention to construction details. Your life's work will outlast your ability to maintain it, continuing to serve ecological functions and provide habitat benefits that extend your influence beyond your individual lifetime. The satisfaction of this continuity makes the repetitive aspects of beaver existence feel not like limitations, but like participation in something larger than personal survival, a contribution to environmental health that justifies the boring routine of daily maintenance and seasonal preparation that defined your existence from adolescence through old age. The structures you've built represent permanent modifications to local environmental conditions that will influence water management, wildlife habitat, and ecosystem health for decades beyond your own involvement. Future beaver families will benefit from the infrastructure you've created, while wildlife populations will continue to utilize the habitat resources your construction made available. The trees growing around your pond will continue their growth, supported by the stable water access your engineering provided. The techniques you've developed and the knowledge you've accumulated through decades of practical experience will continue to influence beaver construction work through the students you've trained and the examples you've established. Your approach to sustainable engineering that works with natural processes rather than against them will shape construction philosophy among future beaver generations who learned from your example or learned from those who learned from your example. The last light fades from your pond, but the sound of water continues its gentle flow through channels you've shaped, carrying your influence downstream toward territories where other beavers will benefit from the flow patterns you've modified and the habitat improvements you've created through a lifetime of dedicated, repetitive, satisfying work that accomplished exactly what beaver work is supposed to accomplish, one stick at a time. The darkness that settles over your territorial landscape doesn't diminish the ongoing functionality of your engineering work. Water continues to flow through structures that operate effectively, regardless of lighting conditions, maintaining habitat and managing seasonal variations through design choices that anticipated the full range of environmental conditions that characterize your regional climate. Your construction serves its intended purposes continuously, requiring neither your attention nor favorable weather to fulfill the functions for which it was designed. In the quiet darkness, with only the gentle sounds of water movement to mark the continuing operation of infrastructure you've built and maintained through decades of patient work, you float in your pond and understand that you've achieved the form of immortality available to beavers. Work that outlasts the worker, construction that continues serving its intended purposes long after the constructor can no longer maintain it, and techniques that influence future generations of builders who will adapt your methods to their own challenges while carrying forward the standards of quality and environmental integration that characterized your approach to the methods. Engineering. Your boring life has been, it turns out, a profoundly meaningful life dedicated to purposes that transcend individual survival and contribute to the health and stability of environmental systems that support countless other creatures. The repetitive routine of construction, maintenance, and seasonal preparation that defined your daily existence has accumulated into legacy infrastructure that represents successful completion of the fundamental beaver mission, improving habitat through patient engineering work that serves both immediate survival needs and long-term environmental health. The satisfaction that comes with this understanding settles into your consciousness like the familiar comfort of well-fitted work clothing, unobtrusive but essential, practical rather than dramatic, valuable, precisely because it enables important work to be completed effectively without calling attention to itself. Your life has been a good beaver life, dedicated to beaver purposes, achieved through beaver methods, and measured by beaver standards of success that emphasize functionality, durability, and integration with natural processes. As sleep approaches, the sounds of your pond continue their gentle rhythm, carrying the evidence of your life's work through the darkness toward dawn, when another day will begin with the same routine inspections, maintenance assessments, and construction decisions that have structured your existence since you first learned to build competent dams. The routine continues because the work continues, and the work continues because it serves purposes that remain important regardless of individual participation. Tomorrow will bring the same opportunities for small improvements, patient maintenance, and creative problem-solving that have characterized every day of your adult life. The boring repetition will continue, and that continuation represents not limitation but purpose. The ongoing expression of beaver nature through activities that create meaning, by serving functions larger than individual preference or immediate gratification. Your boring life, it turns out, has been exactly the life you were built to live, accomplished exactly what beaver lives are supposed to accomplish, and created exactly the kind of lasting contribution that makes individual existence meaningful within the broader context of ecological community, health, and environmental stability. The ordinariness of your daily routine disguised the extraordinary cumulative impact of decades dedicated to patient, competent, environmentally beneficial work. The water continues to flow, and will continue flowing, through channels you've shaped and around barriers you've built, carrying your influence downstream through generations of environmental benefit that represent the true measure of a successful beaver life. Work that improves habitat, infrastructure that outlasts its creator, and techniques that influence future generations of builders who will carry forward the essential work of environmental management through patient, repetitive, fundamentally important engineering that creates the conditions necessary for ecological health and species survival. Your decades of consistent observation have revealed patterns within patterns, seasonal rhythms that themselves cycle through longer variations, generational changes that repeat with modifications, and environmental adjustments that follow predictable sequences while adapting to unique local circumstances. These deep patterns become visible only through extended attention to details that seem random or meaningless during shorter observation periods, but accumulate into recognizable cycles when viewed across the span of an entire beaver lifetime. The 7-year drought pattern that affects your region follows a rhythm you've learned to anticipate and prepare for, with dry periods that stress your water management systems in predictable ways, while providing opportunities to examine and repair structural elements that remain hidden during normal water levels. These extended dry cycles reveal the foundation work of your earliest construction projects, allowing you to assess long-term settling patterns and structural integrity that can only be evaluated when supporting water is temporarily absent. During the drought years, you discover which of your construction techniques prove most durable under extreme conditions, and which approaches require modification to handle stress levels beyond normal seasonal variation. The knowledge gained during these exceptional periods improves your construction philosophy for normal years as you incorporate lessons about structural resilience that can only be learned when natural conditions test your engineering beyond routine operational requirements. The flood cycles that punctuate your region's weather patterns with exceptional high water events follow their own predictable rhythm, arriving roughly every 12 to 15 years, with intensity that overwhelms normal flood control systems and requires emergency response capabilities that exceed routine maintenance procedures. Your experience with 3 major flood cycles has taught you to identify early warning signs and implement preparation strategies that minimize damage while preserving essential infrastructure. These major floods serve as natural renovation events that clear accumulated sediment, redistribute construction materials, and create opportunities for comprehensive reconstruction projects that incorporate improvements developed through years of incremental modification. What initially seemed like devastating destruction of decades of careful work has revealed itself as part of larger environmental cycles that actually enhance long-term habitat quality through periodic renewal of aquatic systems. The generational patterns of beaver family succession create predictable rhythms of territorial occupancy, construction, innovation, and community cooperation that repeat with variations as young beavers establish independence, develop expertise, and eventually become the experienced engineers who guide the next generation. Your own progression from inexperienced kit to respected elder follows patterns you've observed in previous generations, while contributing unique elements that reflect your individual approach to construction challenges and community relationships. Watching multiple generations of beaver families cycle through the stages of territory establishment, skill development, reproductive success, and elder guidance provides perspective on the universal aspects of beaver existence that transcend individual personality and local environmental conditions. The fundamental challenges remain consistent: learning construction skills, establishing territory, managing seasonal variations, raising competent offspring, while the specific solutions reflect individual creativity and local adaptation. Years of working with mud as a construction material have taught you that mud application follows mathematical principles that can be understood intuitively, even without formal knowledge of the engineering calculations that describe the relationship between material properties, structural requirements, and environmental conditions. The consistency that works best for different applications, the curing times required for various weather conditions, and the mixing ratios that produce optimal performance all follow patterns that can be learned through experience and applied reliably once understood. The basic mud mathematics involves balancing clay content for binding strength, organic matter for flexibility, and aggregate materials for structural integrity in proportions that vary based on intended application and local environmental conditions. Foundation work requires heavier aggregate content to resist settling and erosion. Surface applications benefit from higher organic content that provides weather resistance and allows for thermal expansion. Underwater applications need increased clay content for waterproofing and adhesion under submersion conditions. Your understanding of mud mathematics extends beyond basic mixing ratios to include timing calculations that optimize working conditions and curing processes. Morning mud application takes advantage of overnight moisture accumulation and cooler temperatures that allow extended working time before surface hardening occurs. Late afternoon application utilizes day-long warming that accelerates curing while avoiding afternoon thunderstorms that can damage incompletely set mudwork. Seasonal mud mathematics incorporate temperature and humidity variations that affect both material properties and working conditions. Spring mud benefits from snowmelt moisture but requires adjustment for temperature fluctuations that can freeze partially cured applications. Summer mud sets quickly but may crack if applied during excessive heat. Fall mud preparation must account for approaching winter conditions that will stress cured applications through freeze-thaw cycles. The geometry of mud application involves understanding how applied material will behave under various stress conditions, including water pressure, thermal expansion, settling loads, and mechanical forces from ice formation or debris impact. Proper mud geometry creates structures that distribute applied forces effectively, while maintaining flexibility necessary for long-term stability under changing conditions. Your mud mathematics have evolved through decades of trial and observation into intuitive understanding that allows you to assess construction situations and immediately know the appropriate material specifications, mixing procedures, and application techniques needed for successful completion. This knowledge exists below conscious calculation, but emerges reliably when needed for practical decision-making about construction projects that require mud work. The development of genuine patience, not simply waiting for things to happen, but understanding the appropriate timing for different types of action, represents perhaps the most important skill you've acquired through decades of construction experience. Patience in beaver engineering means recognizing which problems require immediate intervention, which situations benefit from delayed response, and which challenges resolve themselves most effectively when approached gradually over extended time periods. Structural patience involves understanding that some construction problems cannot be solved quickly without creating larger problems, and that the most effective solutions often require allowing natural processes time to integrate with engineering modifications. A dam that develops minor leakage may seal itself naturally as sediment accumulates, while premature repair attempts might prevent this natural adjustment and create ongoing maintenance requirements. Seasonal patience means working with natural rhythms rather than imposing artificial schedules on construction activities that depend on environmental conditions for success. Some repairs work best when completed during specific weather conditions, material availability, or water level situations that occur predictably but cannot be rushed. Attempting to force construction activities outside their optimal timing typically produces inferior results that require additional work to correct. Material patience involves understanding that construction materials improve with age and proper preparation, and that using materials before they reach optimal condition produces structures that require more maintenance and achieve shorter service life. Wood that has seasoned properly provides better structural performance than fresh-cut materials. Stones that have weathered in place develop surface characteristics that enhance their suitability for specific construction applications. Community patience requires recognizing that collaborative projects develop most effectively when all participants have adequate time to understand project requirements, contribute their expertise, and develop consensus about implementation approaches. Rushing collaborative construction typically produces conflicts and compromises that reduce project effectiveness while creating relationship problems that complicate future cooperation efforts. Personal patience involves accepting that skill development follows natural progression that cannot be accelerated beyond certain limits, without compromising the depth of understanding necessary for reliable expertise. Your own construction abilities developed gradually through years of practice and refinement, and you've learned to extend similar patience to younger beavers whose skills are developing along comparable timelines. The patience that comes with experience allows you to distinguish between legitimate urgency that requires immediate action and artificial urgency created by anxiety or impatience that leads to hasty decisions and inferior results. True emergencies do require rapid response, but most construction challenges benefit from thoughtful analysis and careful implementation that takes advantage of optimal conditions rather than forcing immediate solutions. Your understanding of engineering has evolved beyond structural mechanics into ecological thinking that considers how construction projects interact with biological communities, environmental processes, and long-term ecosystem health. Beaver engineering, at its best, enhances rather than conflicts with natural systems by creating infrastructure that serves both immediate construction goals and broader environmental benefits. The ecological approach to dam construction involves designing structures that provide habitat for species beyond beavers, while fulfilling water management functions that support overall watershed health. Your fish ladders serve beaver engineering purposes by controlling water flow, but they also maintain connectivity for aquatic species that require access to different parts of the stream system. The shallow areas behind your dams provide breeding habitat for amphibians and feeding areas for water birds, while serving beaver needs for secure food storage and easy construction material access. Understanding plant ecology allows you to anticipate and manage vegetation changes that result from modified water conditions, selecting dam locations and construction techniques that encourage beneficial plant growth while discouraging problematic vegetation that might interfere with dam function or create maintenance difficulties. The cattails that establish themselves in your backwater areas provide natural reinforcement for dam structures while creating habitat for marsh-dwelling species that enhance local biodiversity. Your construction philosophy now incorporates wildlife movement patterns into engineering decisions, ensuring that your dams include features that allow terrestrial animals to cross water barriers without difficulty, while maintaining the water control functions necessary for effective beaver habitat management. Strategic placement of crossing logs and shallow ford areas accommodates wildlife needs without compromising engineering effectiveness. The long-term ecological thinking that informs your current construction work considers how your engineering projects will affect environmental conditions decades into the future, designing infrastructure that adapts gracefully to changing conditions rather than requiring constant intervention to maintain effectiveness. Your understanding of forest succession patterns influences dam placement decisions that anticipate changes in local tree species composition and adjust engineering approaches accordingly. Water quality considerations have become integral to your construction philosophy, with design choices that minimize erosion, prevent excessive sediment accumulation, and maintain appropriate oxygen levels for aquatic life that depends on healthy water conditions. Your spillway designs create aeration that enhances water quality while providing the flow control necessary for effective dam function. The ecological approach to beaver engineering recognizes that successful construction projects must integrate with natural processes rather than override them, creating infrastructure that enhances ecosystem health while serving beaver survival and comfort needs. This integration requires understanding biological processes well enough to design engineering solutions that complement natural systems rather than conflict with them. Your territorial landscape has become a three-dimensional archive of construction decisions, environmental changes, and personal history that records decades of adaptation, innovation, and response to changing conditions. Every structural element in your territory tells stories about the circumstances that led to its construction, the challenges it was designed to address, and the modifications it has undergone in response to experience and changing requirements. The foundation stones of your oldest dam record the learning process of your early construction years, when your techniques were ambitious but inefficient, and your understanding of local conditions was still developing. These stones, now settled deeply into the creek bottom and integrated with natural sediment layers, represent both the permanence of well-placed materials and the evolution of your construction philosophy from enthusiastic but crude approaches to refined techniques that achieve better results with less effort. Each major repair and modification to your primary structures creates layers of construction history that document your developing expertise and changing priorities. The reinforcement work completed after your first major flood reflects lessons learned about structural resilience and the importance of building engineering redundancy into critical infrastructure. The aesthetic improvements added during your mature construction years demonstrate evolution from purely functional approaches toward integrated design that serves multiple purposes simultaneously. The locations where you've experimented with new techniques and materials create a distributed laboratory that records both successful innovations and failed experiments, providing ongoing reference for future construction decisions. The experimental fish ladder that proved too complex to maintain effectively serves as a reminder about the importance of balancing innovation with practical maintenance requirements. The successful integration of living plant materials into structural reinforcement demonstrates effective adaptation of traditional construction techniques. Your territory's construction history includes records of environmental changes that required engineering adaptation, from gradual shifts in water flow patterns to sudden modifications caused by upstream developments or extreme weather events. The elevated spillways, built in response to changing flood patterns, document your adaptation to long-term environmental changes while maintaining essential water management functions. The spatial organization of your territorial infrastructure reflects the evolution of your understanding about optimal construction site selection, material transportation efficiency, and maintenance accessibility. Your earliest constructions were located based on immediate convenience rather than long-term strategic considerations. Your mature infrastructure demonstrates integrated planning that optimizes construction effectiveness while minimizing ongoing maintenance requirements. Personal memory intersects with territorial memory at locations where significant life events occurred within the context of construction activities. The site where you first successfully completed a complex repair without assistance marks your transition to construction independence. The location where you taught your first construction workshop to younger beavers represents your evolution into community resource and expert consultant. The trails that connect different areas of your territory record decades of daily movement patterns that reveal the most efficient routes between frequently visited locations, while documenting changes in your priorities and activities as your expertise and responsibilities evolved. These worn paths represent unconscious optimization of time and energy expenditure through thousands of small decisions about the most effective ways to navigate familiar landscape. Your morning inspection route has evolved through subtle modifications that incorporate lessons learned about the most productive sequence for evaluating territorial infrastructure while accommodating seasonal changes in construction, priorities, and environmental conditions. The current route represents accumulated wisdom about which structures require daily attention, which can be monitored less frequently, and which provide early warning about developing problems elsewhere in your territory. The paths between construction sites and material gathering areas document your developing understanding of transportation efficiency and strategic material stockpiling. Your early construction projects required extensive travel to gather appropriate materials for each construction session. Your mature approach involves maintaining material stockpiles at strategic locations that minimize transportation time, while ensuring adequate supplies for both routine maintenance and emergency repairs. The seasonal variation in your pathway usage patterns reflects adaptation to changing environmental conditions and construction priorities. Spring paths focus on flood damage assessment and emergency repair access. Summer routes emphasize efficiency for major construction projects and material gathering activities. Fall paths prioritize food storage and winter preparation requirements. Winter paths minimize energy expenditure while maintaining access to essential resources and critical infrastructure. The social aspects of pathway development include routes that accommodate collaborative construction activities and community interaction without compromising the efficiency needed for individual territorial management. Shared pathways that connect neighboring territories require diplomatic maintenance that balances individual convenience with community cooperation and territorial respect. Your pathway system has evolved beyond simple transportation efficiency to include aesthetic considerations that enhance your daily experience of territorial navigation. Routes that pass through particularly beautiful or peaceful areas provide psychological benefits that complement their practical transportation functions, creating daily opportunities for appreciation of the environmental conditions your construction work has helped create and maintain. The wisdom embedded in worn paths extends beyond your own territory to include understanding of regional trail networks that connect beaver communities throughout your watershed. Your knowledge of these broader pathway systems facilitates collaborative construction projects, community cooperation during crisis situations, and social interaction that maintains relationships essential for regional beaver community health. Decades of hands-on experience with construction materials have taught you practical chemistry that operates below conscious understanding, but emerges reliably when needed for construction decisions about material selection, preparation, and application. This intuitive chemistry allows you to assess material properties, predict performance characteristics, and optimize construction techniques without formal knowledge of the molecular processes that determine how different materials behave under various conditions. Your understanding of wood chemistry includes recognition of how different tree species respond to water exposure, seasonal temperature variations, and mechanical stress in ways that affect their suitability for different construction applications. Aspen provides excellent workability and appropriate structural characteristics for most dam construction, but lacks the rot resistance needed for permanently submerged applications. Willow offers flexibility that accommodates structural movement, but requires replacement more frequently than harder wood species. The chemistry of natural adhesives involves understanding how plant materials, mud compositions, and environmental conditions interact to create binding systems that hold construction materials together effectively. The organic compounds released by decaying vegetation enhance mud binding properties while providing nutrients that encourage beneficial plant growth. The timing of mud application affects chemical processes that determine final adhesive strength and weather resistance. Water chemistry awareness helps you assess construction site suitability and anticipate how local water conditions will affect material performance and structural longevity. Water with high mineral content creates different construction challenges and opportunities than soft water systems. Seasonal chemistry changes affect construction timing and material selection in ways that can significantly impact project success. Your practical understanding of decay chemistry allows you to predict material service, life, and plan replacement schedules that maintain structural integrity while minimizing maintenance workload. Understanding which materials deteriorate predictably and which prove surprisingly durable under local conditions improves construction, planning, and resource allocation decisions. The chemistry of ice formation and freeze-thaw cycles affects construction design and material selection in ways that require understanding of how water expansion forces interact with different construction materials and structural configurations. Proper design accommodates ice pressure without structural failure while maintaining essential dam functions during winter conditions. Soil chemistry considerations influence foundation work and long-term structural stability, with construction techniques that work effectively in some soil conditions but fail in different geological settings. Your experience with local soil characteristics allows you to adapt foundation techniques appropriately while anticipating long-term settling patterns and erosion potential. Water movement through your territorial infrastructure follows mathematical relationships that you've learned to understand intuitively through decades of observation and adjustment, allowing you to predict flow patterns, calculate capacity requirements, and design modifications that achieve desired hydraulic performance without formal training in fluid dynamics or engineering mathematics. Your practical understanding of flow mathematics includes recognition of how water speed, volume, and pressure interact with structural elements to create predictable patterns of erosion, deposition, and force distribution. Fast-moving water creates different engineering challenges than slow currents, with construction techniques that must accommodate higher pressure and erosion potential while maintaining structural integrity. The mathematics of spillway design involves balancing water control requirements with structural protection, creating overflow systems that prevent destructive flooding while preserving dam integrity during high water events. Your spillway calculations consider both normal flow conditions and exceptional flood volumes, designing capacity that handles predictable variation while providing emergency overflow that prevents catastrophic dam failure. Channel mathematics help you predict how water will behave when flowing through modified stream configurations, allowing you to design diversions, backwater areas, and flow control systems that achieve desired water management results. Understanding how channel modifications affect upstream and downstream conditions prevents construction decisions that create problems in other parts of your territorial infrastructure. The mathematics of seasonal water variation requires understanding how changing flow volumes affect construction project timing, material requirements, and structural performance throughout annual cycles. Low water periods provide construction opportunities that don't exist during high-flow seasons, while flood periods test engineering capabilities and reveal structural weaknesses that require attention. Your flow mathematics incorporate understanding of how multiple variables interact simultaneously to create complex hydraulic conditions that require integrated analysis rather than simple rule application. Water temperature, debris loads, ice formation, seasonal vegetation changes, and upstream activities all affect local flow conditions in ways that influence construction decisions and structural performance. The practical application of flow mathematics allows you to assess potential construction sites and immediately understand hydraulic challenges, capacity requirements, and design approaches needed for successful water management in each specific location. This mathematical intuition guides construction decisions without conscious calculation, but produces results that prove effective when tested by actual water conditions. The approaching end of your active construction career brings reflection on the relationship between individual effort and lasting contribution, between personal satisfaction and community benefit, between the routine activities that filled your days and the permanent changes you've created in the environmental and social systems that will outlast your individual participation. Your life's work represents successful completion of the fundamental Beaver mission, while contributing innovations and improvements that enhance the tradition for future generations. Your construction techniques, refined through decades of trial and observation, have influenced building practices throughout your regional Beaver community, through direct instruction of students and indirect demonstration of effective approaches to common engineering challenges. The standards of quality and environmental integration that characterize your territorial infrastructure have raised expectations for construction excellence, while proving that functional engineering can achieve aesthetic and ecological benefits simultaneously. The relationships you've built with neighboring Beaver families, local wildlife communities, and the broader environmental systems have created networks of cooperation and mutual benefit that extend far beyond your individual survival needs. Your construction work has enhanced habitat quality for dozens of species while contributing to watershed health that benefits the entire regional ecosystem. The patience, persistence, and attention to detail that defined your approach to construction work represent character development that occurred through engagement with meaningful activity rather than abstract moral instruction. The virtues necessary for successful Beaver engineering, careful observation, thoughtful planning, persistent effort, adaptive problem solving, and community cooperation developed naturally through dedication to work that required these qualities for effective completion. Your understanding of natural processes has deepened through decades of working within environmental constraints and opportunities, creating knowledge that combines practical construction skills with ecological awareness and seasonal wisdom. This integration of technical competence with environmental understanding represents the full development of Beaver intelligence applied to the fundamental challenges of creating and maintaining sustainable habitat. The fulfillment you felt throughout your adult life has come from doing meaningful work well. Your efforts aligned personal skill with community need, creating not just personal satisfaction, but lasting contributions to environmental health and species survival. The infrastructure you leave behind will serve Beaver and wildlife communities for decades. The techniques and knowledge you developed will shape construction practices for generations, passed down through those you taught or inspired. Your impact extends far beyond your own lifetime. As night settles over your territory, the steady sound of water moving through the dams and channels you've built offers quiet proof. Your work functions as intended, without needing your hand. True engineering success lies in that independent systems that endure on their own. Tomorrow will bring the same steady rhythm. Inspection, maintenance, gathering, building. But this is not monotony. These routines connect your life to something larger: stewardship of the land, service to the community. The repetition matters because the work matters. Your life, quietly dedicated to careful improvements and consistent maintenance, achieved exactly what it was meant to: lasting environmental benefit. The ordinary nature of your days concealed an extraordinary impact. Built stick by stick, season by season, the water continues to flow, shaped by your efforts, carrying your influence to distant places and future generations. The structures you built will hold for seasons to come. Your work is complete, your legacy secure. A life of quiet, steady labor has created something enduring, a boring Beaver life that was anything but.